A Brisbane mother whose 3 young children were killed when their father set fire to the family car has died in hospital overnight. 31-year-old Hannah Baxter suffered extensive burns. Her estranged husband died of self-inflicted wounds. Senior police described the crime scene as one of the worst they've ever seen. A warning, this story may be distressing for some viewers. Brendan Smith is at Camp Hill where the tragedy unfolded. Brendan, floral tributes are being placed at the site.
Annalise, teddy bears, notes and flowers from loved ones and complete strangers are continuing to build a memorial here on Raven Street in Camp Hill after that absolute tragedy unfolded yesterday. People are remembering those 3 little lives lost, Aliyah, Layana and Trey. Their lives were lost after their father deliberately set the family car on fire after dousing it with a jerry can full of petrol. His estranged wife Hannah was also in the car and somehow managed to free herself when the car was on fire. She could be heard screaming, saying, "He's poured petrol over me." An absolutely horrific scene for first responders here who have described this as one of the most tragic scenes they've been met with. A number of neighbours did rush to help. One woman, in fact, hosing Hannah down while she was covered in petrol and on fire. We spoke to a neighbour, Andrew Sinclair, who spoke about the tragedy that unfolded yesterday morning.
Certainly yesterday was horrific, and for everyone that's been involved, witnesses and people displayed yesterday some great courage under difficult circumstances. The neighbours particularly were really wonderful. I'm a witness to the event. I'm not a any way, shape or form involved in a rescue attempt or anything like that, but the others that were certainly courageous. A lovely lady that was hosing Hannah down with the terrible wounds that she had. They were horrific. Providing care and compassion to these people at the time of need. I do want to also acknowledge that the first responders, they have a difficult job. We talk about that a lot, but having to remove 3 small children from a vehicle in that state would have been horrific.
Now, Annalise, as you could imagine, the Camp Hill community is still coming to terms with this heinous crime. A Facebook fundraiser has been set up to help fund the funeral costs. So far, it's surpassed $32,000. We, of course, know that Rowan Baxter took his own life following the fire with self-inflicted stab wounds. Tributes are continuing to flow for the 3 children and Hannah Baxter, who's described as a loving mother. These tributes will continue to grow here today. Again, police are still urging anyone who witnessed the crime to come forward.
Brendan Smith, thank you. And on that point of how this is impacting the community, we're joined now by the member for Griffith, Terry Butler. Terry, thank you for your time. How did you find out about this horrific incident that took place yesterday?
I was notified by it by one of my colleagues in the local area, and of course there was a flood of first responders heading towards the scene, so a lot of people in the community were deeply concerned. And as you just heard, a lot of the neighbours were witnesses and also themselves first responders to this awful, horrific scene. I've spoken to one of the neighbours yesterday who described what happened in some detail, and as you can imagine, he broke down while trying to explain that. I can only imagine what the family would be going through. This is, it's an unspeakable act that's occurred. And as you would appreciate, the police were there all day working to secure the scene, door knocking the community. You had the ambulance officers who had to deal with the aftermath of, I suspect, the worst crime most of them have ever seen. And I can only imagine what those ambulance officers and police are also going through, as well as the people who are in the neighbourhood, on the street, trying to help, trying to get the victims out of the car, seeing some unspeakable things themselves. It's just an awful situation for everyone, but of course I think everyone's primary sympathies are for the family members of those that we've lost, of Hannah Baxter and her three beautiful children. So the community, I think, is responding as you would expect to a tragedy. People are trying to help, people looking for ways to understand what's happened, but it's trying to understand the understandable, and that's why I really wanted to say to people, whether you're in Camp Hill or whether you're anywhere around the country, if you're feeling distressed about what's happened, and so many people are really struggling to come to terms with it, then I do encourage people to reach out, to speak to someone. A lot of workplaces have, through their EAP programs, counselling available. There's, of course, Lifeline, and I want to just say thank you to Lifeline for being on the scene yesterday afternoon to talk to locals and to assess it. Our primary health network, who I spoke with yesterday morning when I learned of the tragedy, have been reaching out to GP practices, to local health practices, to the state government Metro South health people to try to help put together a mental health response in relation to this tragedy. People don't need to suffer this distress without talking to people, and we should understand the level of trauma that something like this does occasion for people in the immediate family, of course, for people in the immediate community, but also for the many, many, many more people who've been affected by acts of violence in their own lives. And I also want to just, something that happens when a tragedy like this happens, and it happens all too commonly in our country, is that the domestic violence services have a spike in demand for their services. But I want to encourage people, now is the time, if you are feeling this is bringing up feelings for you, or if you're in a violent relationship, now is the time to reach out for help. Whether it's 1-800-RESPECT, the Commonwealth-funded service. Here in Queensland we have DV Connect, which is a crisis line for people who might be in violent relationships themselves. Now is the time to reach out for help, and now is the time to actually seek that help. And we have to, I think, as a nation, come to grips with this tragedy, and that means thinking about really deeply and really seriously what else can be done.
Absolutely, and I know this case will likely raise a lot of questions about what could have been done to prevent it. Terry Butler, thank you for your time. Now, if you or anyone you know is feeling distressed, you can call Lifeline on 131114 or visit www.lifeline.org.au.